Good morning, you two. How are you doing?
Good morning, Arrow. How are you?
Absolutely fantastic. I got to tell you, I love the production value that you have put into this. I'm a production pig. And I mean, I grew up with radio mystery theater. I want and I demand quality, and you guys do it.
Thanks. That's lovely to hear. Yes, we've worked hard on it.
The pacing of the script, I can't imagine how you put that onto a page, in all honesty, because, I mean, the way that you draw me in with those big pauses.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the dramatic pauses. Well, I owe a lot of that to the actors and the way that is performed. You know?
I'll tell you, Arrow. You know, it was such a thrill and surprise to get this script. You can tell when writing is great by how easy it is to memorize, or how elegantly it flows out of your mouth, and how many kind of ways in which you can find to chop it up and play with it. And Dan's writing is some of the best that I've gotten to read and work with in my whole career.
You brought up something very interesting. You said memorize. Is this like doing a script for a movie? Because I mean, it does have that kind of a flow to it where it's coming directly from your mind, body, and soul.
It was one of them. You know, it was a great reminder of how of the importance of storytelling, because we didn't have props and we didn't have a camera. We didn't have setups and lots of takes or a hair makeup team. All you really needed was the emotional resonance of Dan's script. Mm-hmm. And there we are in this little box, in this little studio in the middle of the day in Los Angeles. And having, you know, and there, I was personally having as fulfilling of an experience as I would on any set that I've ever been on.
Yeah. Dan, it's almost like part journal, part drama, and true crime. I mean, there's such a mixture of things going on in this podcast, but it keeps you very glued to the storyline as it's happening.
You know, it's been an interesting thing going from being a filmmaker, you know, and my life making films. Actually, I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Did you?
I did.
What part?
West Charlotte High School.
Right.
I grew up in Plaza Midwood.
Oh,
from Matheson Avenue.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So my hometown. Yeah, man. So making movies, right? And then to when Connell Byrne at iHeart first hit me up, and he knew me as a filmmaker, and we'd done projects together, and he said, you should make a fictional podcast. And I said, no way, I'm a filmmaker. I need a camera. And so this was like a challenge to go, how do you make a movie without a camera? And what I found was that this is this really rich medium where it's not a film, it's not a play, it's not an audio book, but it's somewhere in between all of those. And it captures the thought of all of those. And I fell in love with it.
It's theater of the mind. That's what we have. I mean, you growing up in Charlotte, I mean, you must have listened to John Boy and Billy, who play with theater of the mind every day.
Yep. John Boy and Billy. Yes. See,
and that's the thing I love about writing is that as writers, aren't we envisioning the storyline anyway? And through podcasting, we're just taking what we envisioned into a different area?
I'll say this, one of the things that was the most successful thing about the movie Jaws was that we didn't see the monster.
Yep.
Not much. And, I don't care if you're Steven Spielberg or James Cameron, you're never going to be able to compete with the imagination of the viewer or listener. So the challenge in making a fiction story work across, multiple episodes was just to lean into that and go, this is the challenge. How do you make a movie without a camera? How do you do this? And how do you trust the listener's imagination and fuel their imagination as opposed to trying to supplant it or whatever?
Jonathan, one of the things that really brings this out is the fact that I believe that the accents sound very authentic. What did you have to do in order to make this happen? Because, in the South here, and Dan will prove this true, Southerners don't like it when outsiders try to impersonate them.
Yeah, no, I'm from Boston, so I appreciate that tribalism well, which was made it all the more important to us to make sure that the accents were good and authentic. We had a wonderful dialect coach, a woman named Lisa Bassetti. Worked pretty rigorously with her. I've done a number of Southern accents from Westworld to to justify it. So it's an accent that I'm very comfortable with, but we really wanted to dial it in with Dan, who knows the area, grew up in the area. And then there was a little bit of leeway with the lead character that I was getting to play because he had spent so much time outside of Tennessee in New York and working in kind of the media world of the Northeast. So we had a little leeway, but it was mission critical. The people who are listening to this podcast weren't taken out by any spotty accents. Unacceptable.
Dan, you get to the point right from the very beginning. When Julian gets word of James Fincher's execution, I mean, this is 14 years later, and all of a sudden, as a listener, I'm going, okay, I understand what's going on here. And then all of a sudden, the phone calls start coming in, and you're going, ooh, now I'm really picking up on some drama, because should he be back in Tennessee? Should he not be in Tennessee? He's struggling with that idea of going back or not.
Yes. So it's the same rules apply structurally, to all stories, I guess. And it's intention and obstacle. And you go, okay, let's figure in the second thing there is how do we align the audience or the listener or the viewer with our main character? That's always the goal. So we try to create an immersive experience. And we wanted to align everyone with Jonathan. We wanted to align them with his thoughts and his heart and what he's up against. And we want them to put on his shoes and see the obstacles coming and experience the world through his eyes. So that perspective is always the beginning of any choices we make creatively.
Well, Jonathan, you do that when it comes to locking in on you, because it almost sounds like you're talking directly with me, and then like I'm sitting right there in the situation with you, and I'm traveling with you in the way that the story carries forward. How did you embrace that as an actor, of knowing that we're on this side of the speaker, and you're including us on your walk?
Dan's ego is so big already, I don't want to pump him up anymore. But the writing just allowed me to take a ride. Mm-hmm. So if you're taking a ride with me as a listener, I got to take that ride with Dan as the writer and the actor. I just got to flow with him because the writing was just so strong. And again, it goes back to like what a satisfying experience it was to do this podcast outside of the traditional film sets that I've been on. He just kind of set up this beautiful wave, and we just got to all of us as actors got to just jump on and go with the flow.
Dan, you've done something I've never seen before with the podcast, and that is that you've given open space for Lara Lynn's to have her song "A Killer Inside" up there on its own. Most people, they bury their music in it, but you've given us that opportunity to really get into that song.
Lara Lynn is, for one thing, it's criminal how talented she is. she took the conceits of the show and the general themes, and she crafted this song. And right out of the gate, it was like, I don't have any notes. This song is amazing, and it really is. And it became our anthem, and it is. It's a testament to her and her ability. But she's just such an ideal fit, coming from that True Detective world. She did the music for True Detective season 2, and she's already sort of got this haunted darkness to her lyrics and her musicality. Anyway, it was such a pleasure to be able to work with her, and it was such a beautiful song that functions in the show, kind of like the opening credits sequence would for a streamer. And I really wanted to highlight that. I really wanted to celebrate it, and so we gave it its own episode, basically.
And Dan, when Dan first sent over the materials for the Mantawauk Caves, and I was going through them, I remember he sent over a Spotify playlist, and I started reading the script, listening to the music that Dan had put together, and it was, it transports you. It's so visceral, the way that that auditory experience in general can be for us, particularly now that we all have access to the technology. It's like not everybody has a movie screen in their house, but they've got these iPhones, and we have the headphones to be able to fully take in the sound. So it just takes you somewhere so quickly and so viscerally or so emotionally. That first Spotify playlist I just knew this guy was somebody who could bring you to a new experience with one or two notes.
I was going to ask you about that music because it almost sounds like that you guys were acting this out and the orchestra was right there with you because it fits in so well.
Ben love it.
Dan, do you remember that we played a few of those songs on the first day or two? Just to
absolutely.
Get into
Yeah, and it was fantastic. It really does. It's a great to set the mood. And when I'm writing, that was the playlist that I wrote with. And I have to shout out to Zoe Cooper and Nicholas Tukoski, my co-writers on this, because they, I could not have done it without them. But yeah, the music is from Ben Lovett. He actually gave us, it's amazing what he did. He read some of the early episodes, and much like Lyra, he gave us this entire library of music with which to edit and to, instead of having temp music to layer into the thing and then have the composer try to replace that later, Ben gave us this stuff up front to use so that his music was the temp, and it started to have its own sort of, the DNA of the show is very much built out of the music that we hear. That's so interesting you say that, because even as a commercial producer, that music is so valuable and so important to me, because normally when I go into a production studio, they want the voice, then they go find the music. And I'm going, well, no, let's create the emotion first. Let's figure out who we want to reach, who they are, what kind of a car are they driving, who am I talking with here? Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so we, Ben and I had a lot of conversations about, well, we know it's dark. We know there's mystery. We know there's suspense. We know there's horror. But the instrumentation has to be, rooted in the Southeast and especially in Tennessee. And that's why Lyra Lynn was so perfect as well. She's an indie, songwriter from Nashville. So it just all worked out really well. And it's honestly, with Lyra's song, it's one of the first times I've ever been able to create a movie or a show with a sonic stamp like that. Yeah. Because music costs so much to license for shows, and to out of the gate have one that was generated with us and organically, as part of the show was just a real, I'm so grateful. The sound quality of it to me as a listener, envision it in my heart and head. It sounds like that you were wearing a mask in the opening stages of the podcast, Jonathan. Were you wearing a mask, or was that just some damn good sound effects or something, a plug-in for Pro Tools? That's some damn good sound effects that Dan and his team probably speak to. Dang. But I will say that one of my favorite parts of all of this. Was when Dan, I got a package in the mail. I opened it up. It's a little note from Dan saying how excited he was to start making this thing. And inside was a little tape recorder, like a dictation recorder that you used 25 years ago. And on it was a recording of Dan and his son who's how old's your boy? 5? Yeah, he's 6 now, kindergarten. Yep. And it brought me back to that time when you used to click those 2 buttons to record, because the quality of that sound was so unique. Mm-hmm. So employing a number of those devices in the podcast was really fun for me to go back and listen to as I've listened to the podcast. Now I'm listening to them in real time with you, Arrow. So as they're coming out one by one, I'm right there alongside the listeners. Wow. The texture that listeners pick up on, it's changed so much. I remember the days when it had to be high quality. There better not be a needle dropping anywhere in the background. I love the texture where it feels like, Dan, that you are taking us someplace. It's so NPR, because NPR mastered that art. You do take us someplace in this podcast. There are actually, we had spent a lot of time discussing and creatively figuring out the layers of the show. So I wanted to set up a situation where we could take the listener wherever we wanted, whenever we wanted, across time and space. So at times you'll hear the playback, the texture of a decayed playback that's with low batteries, that's from the archives, and then we'll dissolve back in time into that in world, as we call it, back into that exact moment, and we will transport the listener back into time, and then from there, as they start to reminisce, or as they may even have flashbacks, we'll start to have this impressionistic soundscape that'll layer in on top of that. So at times it's 2D and archival. At other times it's 3D and binaural. So.
Jonathan, in the second episode, and I don't want to spoil it or anything like that, but Julian is given information about the Hadley brothers. In that moment, I'm going, okay, here's where we're going to pass the baton. We've got to be able to build up this relationship that we've heard about the Hadley brothers in the first episode, but now that this investigation and this information is opening up, there's a challenge here in what's happening.
Certainly. I mean, we're this is as much of a physical transportation or physical journey back home as it is an internal one for our lead character. And that's also not so abstract. Whenever you come back to a place, you come back to memories and you come back to experiences. Certainly, if you come back for a high school reunion or you go back with the kids in the neighborhood you grew up in, it's always filled with some really good things and some things that you might not have made you feel comfortable. And that's what happens in the Mantawauk Caves.
Dan, you coming from Charlotte, I mean, where there's a church on every block. I mean, it's like these words right here, the Lord works in mysterious ways. He's got nothing on the devil. Whoa, man, I'm going, oh, my God.
Yeah. Growing up in the Southeast, they call it the Bible Belt.
Yeah.
And growing up in Charlotte, it's definitely was a big part of my past, and the influence and sway, both for good and and maybe for not so good, the church has over the mechanics of the politics and the leadership. I definitely wanted to play with that as a force in this. And we have Reverend Perkins, played by our lovely Scott Poitras. I love how everybody who listens to it, the first thing they say is, I hate that guy.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, the church is a prominent influence on all factors of your life growing up in the Southeast, especially. And I wanted that to be a sort of a force in the show.
How did you have to research and make this a part of your weave, Jonathan, in the way that, because I mean, it really sounds like that you're in that moment, but you've got to do research. You have to envision yourself as someone. What was the coaching? Because I mean, to have a voiceover coach is one thing, but to bring it to life is another.
Yeah, I mean, we're all a lot more connected than the media wants to make us out to feel or to be. And I'm a father, so I thought of during these politically divisive times, how kind of artificial that really is when you're on a playground, for instance. Everybody's looking out for everybody else's kid, and as I said, going home is kind of the same sort of an experience or a similar experience for everybody, no matter where they're from. When you allow yourself to be taken by a story, the story itself does the work. All the commonalities are there. Just being present to what is invoked in yourself and allowing that to reveal itself or find itself and express itself, whether it's on a set or in a recording studio. It's really the same sort of a process. It probably just takes some people maybe find it very quickly as an actor. Other people takes a decade or two. But that the real work is there versus the kind of the rudimentary or the just the homework that you have to do to know about a certain town or a certain accent or certain relationships. Those things you work on, like you work on brushing your teeth. But it's about understanding, the humanity or the inhumanity of man that makes taking a ride like this so profound.
Jonathan, your brilliance here, and we're so grateful to have. That was the first big sort of like, oh, we have a show now when Jonathan signed on, because there's like if one method for acting is yourself in a different set of circumstances. So you start with yourself, and Jonathan has that. He brings this richness of his own personality and his own experiences to the table. And yeah, sure, he has an accent, and that's the homework. Or, you know, what it means to be in these conditions for this show, his best friend's on death row. You know, these are the conditions, but it's himself in this set of conditions. And he brought that soul to the part, and it's what makes the show work. Yeah, I mean, that's it.
It's the emotion that keeps you going, and because you've got hope, you've got faith in this, and you're going, okay, what is going to happen here? Especially, and I know I'm running out of time, but when Julian, you touch on the blackouts in episode 1, but you finally give listeners even a deeper story when you get to episode number 3, because then we begin to understand even more about Julian, and we have more compassion for what he's doing and what he's going through.
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I even in that first episode, one of my favorite parts is about, like, I was going down to Mantawauk County whether I wanted to or not. I mean, he's there in the car, trying to put, wakes up, trying to put the keys in there. I think we could all relate to when we feel like the hand of God or intuition or circumstances are driving us towards a certain goal. And it just is further recognition that we're not on our own time.
Yeah. You guys have got to come back to this show anytime in the future. The door is always going to be open for you.
Arrow, thank you. Thank you for having us.
You bet. You be brilliant today, okay, you guys?
Thanks, brother.
Thank you.